Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, Director of Customer Success, as well as Dion McCormick, a longtime Alpha expert here with Alpha. Today, Dion is going to be going over Python, which is an exciting new addition to the Alpha Anywhere sort of suite of tools and capabilities built in. And I believe he's covered a little bit before, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So I hope you find it interesting. Of course, we're here to answer any Alpha Anywhere questions. You could type those questions into the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Welcome back, Dion.
How you doing there?
I'm doing well. Go ahead and make you the presenter if you're not.
Cool, thank you.
Make presenter.
Awesome. Well, good to talk to y'all, and we all appreciate everybody joining us for our GoToWebinar. One of the key things is we do this to answer your questions, and so you can help us help you by going to your questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel and put any questions in there. You can put obviously questions related to our presentation today, or other things that are, just burning that you need to know about. And as you heard earlier, if we don't have an immediate answer, we'll look it up, we'll find it, we'll get it information to you, because we really want to make sure you have all the key information, all your questions, so that you can move forward effectively developing alpha systems. So today we're going to talk about something really cool, something that actually I've been talking to the team about for a while, and it's really cool to see these pieces come together. And what this is integrated Python support, and I might be able to spell correctly here, inside of Alpha Anywhere. This is a really, really neat addition. And at first glance, it's like, well, I've got everything I need in Alpha. Why do I need this? Well, we'll talk a little bit more of how this is valuable to you as a developer. One thing that's really neat about this, we'll talk a little bit more, is that it's a very well thought out, focused implementation for two reasons. One, a lot of work has gone in to make it simple to do it. And then the other part of it is that a lot of work has also gone into it to really make it easy to integrate with your alpha environment, meaning that, sometimes you get these kind of Frankenstein systems where you kind of bolt them together and it's really hard to talk between the two. That's not true with the implementation here. The development team did a fantastic job of making it easy to kind of create a blended environment and system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, let's talk about Python. Well, first, it is now the most popular language. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on that, I'll show you some charts real quick, but it is incredibly popular in the world. And what's neat about that is that there's this incredible ecosystem of code and other support things, training, code modules, etc. And most developers who have systems provide some kind of level of Python capability to make it easy for Python users or developers to integrate with their systems. So the ecosystem is massive and getting bigger and bigger and bigger every day. There's also an incredibly large pool of experienced developers. So one of the powerful things about that is that, sometimes it's hard to find folks who know XBasic because it's kind of unique to our platform. Now, granted, it's very easy to learn and very easy to pick up. But again, you're not going to find a whole bunch of experienced XBasic programmers on LinkedIn or Upwork or places like that. Whereas with Python, there's an enormous amount of developers. So that allows you to extend your development team for your projects by being able to leverage some very experienced, well-priced, reasonable people out in the marketplace. And especially if you're doing some kind of integration with a third-party system, that ecosystem and the experienced developers could really help accelerate what you do and bring that capability into your Alpha Anywhere environment. And as I mentioned, there's very tight integration with the Alpha Anywhere platform, be able to move information back and forth between the two systems, and also the support will go through from there. Now, as I mentioned Python is very, very popular. There's a TIOBE index, which is a industry standard, and they do surveys. And you'll see that Python has kind of gone all the way up the chart in terms of surveys of programming language of the year. Like what do people want to prefer to use to do their programming with? And you can see that, you have Java and other pieces in there. Visual Basic still up in there. I think that's driven a lot by the power stuff that's going on out there. But Python is way up there at the top and getting more and more popular at all time. And there's a real key reason for this. It's not only that it's a fairly straightforward language. If you know Visual Basic, you'll be able to pick up Python in a heartbeat. A lot of the constructs are very similar. You have to learn a few new kind of ideas, but you can pick it up and run with scripts very, very quickly. But Python is incredibly successful beyond just systems development. Python has really become the go-to language for two areas. One is in data science, the ability to analyze and munge data, which is a huge, huge business now, and also in artificial intelligence, or really machine learning. There's an enormous amount of support in that area for that. So you have all these people coming in and you starting to use this language that are really not programmers. They're coming in as data scientists or analysts or scientists, and they need to use this information, and they're starting to use it. So it's very popular and growing in popularity all the time. Now, as far as this is, I believe 2021 or 2020 data is where it ends up, but this is from GitHub, and this is showing the percentage of languages in GitHub in terms of repositories. So when you build a repository, you check in and it could have mix, but you kind of designate what kind of language is in that repository on GitHub. And as you can see, over time, Python is starting to really pick up steam. JavaScript's still number one just because the enormous amount of websites that need JavaScript and projects and other stuff like that. But Python's going up. C+, actually interesting, C# keeps kind of holding its own, but you can see other ones are starting to drop off and not as busy, like Ruby's really kind of dropped, and JavaScript's number one, Java's dropping, but very cool. And even look at PHP. I mean, I think what you're starting to see is a lot of people who did PHP are jumping on Python, just because there's just such a bigger ecosystem and a lot of functions that go into it from there. So long story short, it's extremely popular, which means there's an enormous amount of support for it. There's an enormous amount of people who know it, who are learning it, who are mastering it and contributing to the ecosystem. And so I think you'll find that when you're starting to look at scaling up your team or being able to move quicker, you're going to have a little easier time finding resources to help you do it by bringing this functionality into it. So I'm going to talk about real quick, I'm going to go through a demonstration of how we set up and integrate a Python in there, and also talk about how we're going to integrate a third-party module, which is a way to bring in these ecosystems. We'll talk a little bit more about how they're tightly integrated together, and obviously answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over, but I wanted to do audio visual coming through okay there, Dave? All good?
Yes, they sure are. Thank you.
Outstanding. Just want to make sure we don't have like glitches or things like that. So I have a brand new clean workspace in Alpha Anywhere. I'm using one of the more recent. This isn't the community edition. This is the official one, just a little difference, but you won't see a lot of differences in this area, but I like to be upfront in terms of that. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and build Python integration into my system. So the first thing I'm going to do, and by the way, you don't need a new workspace to do this. If you have an existing workspace, you can enable all of this directly from with your existing workspace. So you don't have to start with a scratch new workspace. But I'm going to go here. I'm at the Web Projects Control Panel. I'm going to go up here, and you'll see on our main button menu here, there's one that says More. And I don't know if you've looked in there, but there's a lot of stuff hidden in here. It's crazy how much is built into this that just doesn't show up, but there's a lot of really information stuff that's in here. Now you'll see there's a menu item here called Python. It's got the little Python logo to it. And then there are two items in here. And we're going to start with the first one, which is create a Python folder in your web project. So you'll see that right now over on the left, you'll see there's nothing associated with Python. So we're going to set up the information or the system to do that. I'll come back to this install a Python package in a few moments and explain a little bit more of the power of that. So again, I go to More, Python, create a Python folder. Okay. brings up a little Genie to help me out. And it says it's going to tell me what it's going to do. It's going to create a new folder for storing there. And it gives you this option. And I highly recommend when you do this, you select this. And I'm going to call this demonstration. So this says, hey, I'll go ahead and create your first little piece of JavaScript code, or I'm sorry, not JavaScript, but Python code, and put it in there for you. And that's nice because then you can start editing it, modifying it. And it's sort of like when you do an XBasic callback, it gives you a bunch of sample code you can work off of, which is really handy. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I do want it to do that. And I'm going to create my module name. I'm just going to call it demonstration. I'll go create folder. Okay, so you'll notice now it created a new folder. And if I go in that folder, you'll see that it created a module. Now, what a module is in Python, and this isn't a Python class, but we need to talk about a few things like that. A module is just a Python file, and they've used that name because the idea is you could have these Python files, bring them into your project, and then use them within your project. So it's like just a terminology thing there, but it's a Python there. Now, this is purely just a text file. It's not binary or anything like that. So I can click on this, and if I need to like actually open it with something, and so you can choose any number of programs. By the way, I like one just to know is Notepad++, but I'm actually going to take another step where on this local machine, I have something called Visual Studio, which is Visual Studio Code. And this is a free piece of software from Microsoft. It's their standard kind of like, they have Visual Studio, which is their full-blown development environment IDE, but they have what's called Visual Studio Code, which they give away for free. You can go on the internet and download it. And it's a really nice little IDE. I mean, it's supported. It really makes your life easier. Again, I could do everything I wanted to do in a text editor. That is perfectly okay, but I'm going to use this from here. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you what that little piece of there, but real quick, all that's gone on here is that Alpha created a new folder, inserted a sample file for me, and now we can talk about how we're going to use that in the system. So first, I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to get rid of that there. Let me just show you real quick. I want to try something. Choose a program, new program, and I'm going to go to local dist, program file. I like to have this one in there. Notepad++ is just a really nice a free editor that you can get on here. So let's go ahead and go open with Notepad++. So what's nice is once you set that up, if you need to edit this, you can write, actually, let me explain what I just did, because you'll find in this area, it's kind of handy. I right-clicked on the file and it said, okay, open with what? And so initially Notepad was available, which is the built-in Notepad, but I added this. But you can also choose another program, and you'll see when I clicked on there, it allows me to add other programs associated with it. So I can say new program. This now opened up and allowed me to go to see all the different items in here, and I can go ahead and pick a different program that I would like to use. I went into Notepad++ and opened it there, but you could have done everything else. And the benefit is that once you've done that, then whenever you need to edit a certain type of file, you can right click and say open in Notepad++. So let's say you had a CSS file in there and you wanted to edit it. Maybe you have a CS editor you'd like to use, etc. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to go ahead and find out where all these files are at. I'll copy this and I'm going to go back into Visual Studio and I'm going to say file open. And again, you don't need Visual Studio. You can do it all in your text editor, but I like this because it shows a lot of stuff. So let me go ahead and open a folder and I'll paste that in there. And there we go, and select the folder. And so this is very similar. You'll notice sort of like Alpha is over here, it shows you the file. In here on the left side of the menu, there's my files. Let me go ahead and expand this a little bit more and show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is Python. And what's nice, there's tons of training out there. So let's go ahead and click on demonstration. And you can see this is the file that Alpha generated. It's a sample file. It has a single function. So sort of how we do function and then give it, that's why I think you're going to like it, because it's very easy to pick this up. So you can see it says DEF. That's equivalent to us saying function in Visual Basic, or I'm sorry, XBasic. So you say DEF function, and then here are your input parameters, and then here's your code that would use right here. Now, you'll notice, and I'm going to come back and talk about this for you, and that's why I liked it generating this this file for me, is that there is a certain set of known things that get passed into it. Check that out, session variable. So when Alpha calls this function in Python, it actually passes some great data, and that's what helps generate this great intersection between Alpha and Python, is that you can pass in like session variables and things like that, and it handles all that. It's pretty cool. And you'll see there's a whole set of text here. This is sample code that you can use to learn things like how to use built-in Alpha, call an XBasic function or do other things. And I'm not going to cover all that today. I want to keep it really simple from there. So we have a demonstration file called function1. So that's all fine and dandy, but let's go back into Alpha, and I'm going to create an XBasic script to show you how we then call out to that function. Okay, call Python function. So let me go back real quick. You'll see that how this works is that basically the Alpha is going to find this file, go in and call this function, and then bring it back from there. So I'm just going to say return hello world. That's all this function does right now, is basically when this function is run, you can do a whole lot of stuff, but it just returns a value called hello world. And that's in the Python world, and Alpha XBasic has the same thing. I didn't call it function1 is equal to this. Alpha, you may have done something like function1 is equal to that. All you have to do is say return. And if anybody calls this function right here, it's going to return the value that you put here, which could be the result of any number of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and file and save that. So I've saved that so it's updated. Now I'm going to go in here, and I just want to write a little XBasic function. In a few moments, we're going to hook it into a UX and show you really how to do how to integrate it into your user interface. But I just want to start simple here. Now, an important feature is I need essentially XBasic to call out to Python to go find that function and do it. So what's neat is Alpha, to make my life easier, as they usually do, I right click wherever I want to build this, and you'll see there's a Genie, and there's a new Genie here called call a Python function. So again, I right clicked on the white space to open up this menu, and then I went to Genie's call a Python function. And what this does is it helps me write a little code to be able to call that function. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. So the first thing it's going to do is ask me, well, okay, what module or what file is that Python function in? Well, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I forget, but let me go ahead and click select, and it knows, oh, this is your demonstration function, so I can select it there. Now it's asking me, well, when you call it, what function do you want to call? So let's go back here, and instead of function1, let's actually call this hello world, just for fun. Okay, so we have hello world. I'll save that. Remember, you want to save it. So it's always saved. So we're going to actually call hello world. So if I go back into Alpha, I'm going to say hello. And you can see right now, it's already built my stuff. And then I can say insert in script. So it writes this little thing here that allows me to go through and call that function. Now, I'll come back to this in a minute, but you'll notice it added this little reload module. Basically, that forces Alpha to reload the module, because once you're actually running, it loads it into memory so things go faster. So if you ever want to make sure that it always picks up whatever the text file is on the drive and brings that into it, do that from there. But you can see it's pretty straightforward. You have return value is equal to, and then this is a little piece of Alpha XBasic that says look in module demonstration and call these. And by the way, go ahead and pass these values to that function in Python, including the E in session. And that's where it allows you to kind of blend information in Alpha into Python from there. And then I'm just going to go here and say show var return value. So I'll go ahead and run this. What this is going to do is call that, run the code in here, and then come back. So let's go ahead and go back here to there. And, oh, request not found. Oh, I wonder why request. Oh, I know what this is. Should be, okay. Explain this. This is really meant to call it from an XBasic callback where you have there. So let's go ahead and just bear with me. I'm going to go ahead and set that up so we can do it from here. So let's go ahead and go back here, create a new UX. We should create one that doesn't need that and are like the default. So do that from there. So I'm going to go create this here. And I'm going to create a control here called result. And I'm going to create a button here. I'll say call function. Okay. In here, I'm going to do an AJAX callback. This is all pure there. Okay. So what this does is that basically I'm going to call this function and then I'm going to put the result in this result here. So when I call this function, it does an XBasic callback and then it runs this function right here. And you'll notice, oh, look, there's an E and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab this code I had right here. I'm going to go back in here and paste it. Now, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and go to Genie and do it right here. So let me just show you the right way. So normally I wouldn't have gone in the other place. I would have started right here and said, let's go ahead and put it in demonstration. Okay. And then hello world. Okay. So that does there. It turns the revalue. And then I'm just going to say e._set dot result dot return value is equal to return value, which is all I'm doing in this line is I'm saying after you call this function in Python, go ahead and grab the result and put it into the value on the screen. So let's give this a try and see what happens. Okay. So in a moment, you'll see we have a result and a call function. So I'll call that and look at that. Hello world. When I called this, it ran this little piece of script that went and then called Python and said, hey, go ahead, do your work and do it from there. So let's change this. So now let's say I don't want it to say hello world. I want it to do something like different there. So I'm going to say the text is equal to hello world. And again, this isn't meant to there. And then we can use all of the cool features of text to, you can then use Python to say text is equal to hello world plus, actually, let's do this. So I'm sorry, I went down the wrong thing. So let's say I just change this. I do some stuff, hello big world. And I save that. Watch what happens. Now I've saved it. And if I go back into alpha and I run this function again, it's going to now reload that Python module and hello big world, some of those pieces there. So what you'll find, which is interesting, is you'll probably end up editing your Python stuff outside and then bring it in and do more of your editing out there. The nice thing is you can use command line, you can use a lot of features in Python. There's a lot of debuggers and other things that go from there. Now, a couple of things I want to show is how do I pass information into that function that's here? And let's go ahead and show you that real quick, because that shows you how cool alpha is. So what we can do is go in here. Let's go to the design here. And what I want to do is I want to say session dot my value is equal to, and we'll go test, something like that. So I've created a session variable in here, and it could have been read from the user interface or things like that, whatever you want to do from there. Now you'll notice I don't change the signature here because the session variable is being passed into the Python. But now I can go into my Python and I can go, the value is equal to session dot, what did I call it there? Let's go back in here. Actually, let me show you this here. Let's see if they haven't. So you can see right here, your code can read and set the session variable. And so let me go back to here. I set it as my value. So I'll go back here, go back up here, and then I'll say my value. Okay. And what I'm going to do is return that session variable that was passed in and put from there. Okay. File, save it. I'm going to go back into Alpha, and now we'll do a working preview. And I didn't put an input, but if I call it there, you'll see that it added that session variable. So I can do here. And so you'll notice that it populates session, passes it in. So that way you can pass information from your system over into there. So you'll see, notice it then took that new test, which was the thing I passed in. One other thing I want to mention on that is that if you want to, you can do things by session variables, but you can also add my variable. You can also add in your own items. And then when you call it inside of Alpha, you can then say, variable X. So you're not required just to go through session variables. You can actually go ahead and modify your code to actually add in your own parameters that go into it. And so that may be a little simpler or more direct, whatever you'd want to do there. So real quick recap, the idea is you are editing this module, this Python file. It can access a lot of cool stuff. It can access the request. It can request the session. You can even go in here and actually access Alpha's connection string and database connectors. There's a lot of built in, and that's beyond the scope of today's discussion, but it really allows you to do some cool stuff where you don't have to go into Python and set up a whole bunch of elaborate things. You can kind of let Alpha give you information and then work off it and do special stuff there. Now, you might go, well, that seems like a lot of work just to do these simple scripts. And the answer is, yeah, that's overkill. I would do that next basic, get rid of there. But there are a lot of really powerful what are called modules, things like scientific scientific modules, things like pandas and NumPy and stuff like that. There's all these libraries about machine learning that you can include in it. So it's not necessarily just running these little scripts, but rather bringing in all those modules. Another cool module is a lot of about integration. Like let's say you want to integrate to Slack. Well, they have a module you can get, and thus the coding is super simple. So to give you an example of that, let's do a fun example. So on the internet, I found a cool, fun kind of module that's available called PyJokes. And basically you call it and it gives you back a random joke. It's a lot of fun there. And so you can see it. This is called, let's go here. This is called PIP, Python Index. And this is sort of a library of all the different modules that people have contributed. So think of it as like an online library of that. And you can see there are tons and tons and tons of libraries. And they're all a range of different things that you would want to do. And you can search through this. You can look for it and say, let's look for Stripe. Okay. So maybe you want to do some Stripe integration, although we have it. They have a module put in there called Stripe that does all the integration for you. And there's documentation and other things like that. So I found one for fun today called PyJokes. And basically, this just does a pie joke here. So in order for this to work, we have to do two things. First, we need to take this set of files. So a module can, this could include one or more files from Python to be included in your project. So the first thing you need to do is bring that into your project. Then you integrate it into your little script to be able to do it. And so let's first talk about integrating this into our code. Now, normally you would do a command line instruction after you've installed Python and do some command lines to do that. Alpha doesn't want you to have to go through that work. So I'm just going to copy PyJokes here. I'm going to go back into Alpha and I'm going to go back to our web projects control panel. So you'll remember that when I went to more Python, we had two options. We had one called create a Python folder, the other one called install a Python package. Well, in this case, I want to install a Python package. So I'll go in here. You'll see currently I don't have any installed packages. So I want to add a package. So I click add package. I put in what that package is and I say install. In a few moments, it runs all the command stuff for me and check it out. There it is. It went to this website. It grabbed all of the necessary files and brought them in and put them into my alpha project in that folder. So if we go back in here, so we're done doing that. If we go in there, you'll notice that, there's a bunch of new folders. I didn't have to worry about this. Alpha does that for me. It created a whole bunch of folders and everything for me so I don't have to do all of that work. So now I can access this, sort of this code, and these could be very elaborate folders. I mean, these could have a lot of code into it from that standpoint there. So now step one is done. I now have this module PyJokes available to it. Now step two is I need to actually integrate into my script or into my Python using that module. So I'm going to go back here. You'll see that there is documentation available for this all on this site. So it shows you how to do the install. We already did this, but it shows how you do the, how you actually use it. And this is a very simple module, but some are a little bit more complex and other pieces. Maybe you have to put in credentials or things like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into my demonstration file here, and I'm going to create a new function. So I'm going to call it give me a joke. Now, very important, I want to use the standard way Alpha does this. So I'm going to copy that and put that there and here. And then I would say return just for now the joke. Okay. So now I have a new function that's in my Python file to use. Now, what I want to do is I don't want to create the joke myself. I want to use the module's capability. So I'm going to go back here, and you'll see in my sample script, and this is the example, you have to do two things. You call it import, and then there's the actual code, and this is like printing a joke. It says pyjokes.getJoke. Now, what are we doing when we're importing? Let me go ahead and copy that. Let me go back to here, and at the very top of my file, before I define anything, I'm going to put in import pyjokes. Okay, so very powerful, and this is why the concept of modules happens. What this does is that when this script runs, the first thing it does is it says, I need to import this data. So it runs over, finds those files that have been installed on my system, and brings that data in so that later when I use them, they're available. So Python modules are just a file or set of files that have all that code in it that you can bring into your actual application or script or whatever you're doing there. So first thing you gotta do, if you're gonna use a third-party package, obviously install it in Alpha, and then secondly, make sure you do an import here. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna copy that. And what I'm gonna do inside of the script here, instead of return the joke, I'm gonna do this. So what happens here is you'll notice I import it. It's going to say, look in that module and run this function right here. And then after you get that function, which is a joke, return it from this function here. I could have gone, joke is equal to this. And then I go here and say joke. There you go. Up to you. That's really up to your coding there. So I'll just do that from there, because this could be multiple lines of code that are going on there. Okay, so I imported my module. That's important because if I ran this script and I hadn't done that pip install earlier, then when it got to this line, it would look for that file and would say, oh, sorry, and stop running. So you would get an error. So it's important that after you install it, before you do anything, make sure you install the modules you want and then put them in from there. And I'm going to show you one other module before we get off today that is super powerful because it really makes your life super easy. Okay, so I've got my updated demonstration file. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to go back into my demo. And I'm going to just go ahead and reuse this call. Actually, let's create a new, I'm going to just reuse it to make it simple. So instead of calling that other function, when I click here, it's going to run this XBasic. And now what I want it to do is, instead of doing any of this stuff, basically I'm going to go call demonstration and I'm going to call get joke. This is the function. And again, what's very important, and you may want to just copy it, it's called give me a joke. That's why you want to do it. It's the function name that's inside of here. So I actually want to do that. So it's going to go in the demonstration file. It's going to run this. Inside that file, it's going to do all the work of finding the module and things like that. And then it's going to return that value. And then I'm just going to set my value there. So let's give that a try. And let's make sure I've saved my item here. So we'll go ahead and do a demo. We'll go back in here, working preview. So now when oh, you know what? Let's do this. Let's make this a little bigger because I know it's going to be more than, there we go. A little bigger so we can see the full joke. Okay. So now I'm going to call the function. They're actually really dorky jokes, by the way. So, but you'll notice that it called my function. My function then used that module, the PyJokes module, to generate a joke, handed it back to me, and now I used it in here. We try another one. There you go. Each time I call it, it's getting there. So that one's pretty good. If you've been with Windows a long time, you get it from there. So what's really cool about that is that you have this incredible universe of modules that are available to use. And again, PyJokes is a simple kind of silly example, but that just shows you how easy you all have to do this. All you have to do is go to More, Python, install the package. Once it's installed, then you can start using that in your Python script. So let me show you one other super powerful, super important module that I really like. And I'll show you the real reason why this is super cool from here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install another module. And I happen to know what it is. It's called request. And this is Python's standard tool for making API requests to other systems. And so you'll see in this case, you'll notice that, whoa, a whole bunch of stuff got included. Request is what I was talking about, but it actually includes a whole bunch of other things that it needs. So you have these things called module dependencies, where if you install this module, it needs these modules. That's probably one of the more challenging things in the Python world, but they're working on making that easy. And you'll notice behind each model, there's a version number. Like when we did PyJokes, it's 060. Over time, and it's beyond our scope today, you can freeze these things and do other pieces from here. But there's tons of YouTube videos to talk about it. But I have this cool thing now installed called request, and I can use that in my script. So I'm going to freeze my screen for a second because I want to bring up and give you an example of an example. So let me bring that up while I do that, right? Okay. I should have had this already ready, and I apologize. Be with you in just a few moments. Okay. And again, the neat thing about it is there's like a billion amount of stuff out there. So, okay. So I'm going to go back in here and let me go ahead and re-share my screen. Okay. So I've installed that. I'm going to go into my alpha and I'm going to create a new, and this, I won't get this fully working because I apologize. I didn't have an example of it there, but I'm going to go dev call API. return result. Okay, and I'll copy this stuff here. And I'm going to touch on this just because it's really powerful and it's super nice from there. So I've created a new function in my demonstration called API. First thing I did is we mentioned I've got to import requests. Okay. So I'm going to import request, and that will include all of that code about how to run a request model or, request from there. Now, the reason I show you this is that Alpha has a lot of really powerful tools. Like for instance, if I have a script, let's go to my script right here. I can use genies to do things like, for instance, to take a curl command. I can take a Genie here and I can do a curl command to XBasic. So curl is the industry standard for that. But, I found that's hit or miss. It works and there's a bunch of features, but if I just want to call a third-party API, I have to go through some steps to work it out and get it running. Well, the cool thing about using requests with Python in this way is the following. I'm going to show you another tool here called, go ahead here. Let's go and there we go. Okay, I'm going to show you another tool here called Postman. And for anybody who's doing any API work, this is an example of Postman. So what this allows you to do is it's a third-party tool free that allows you to run and exercise third-party APIs and any API you want to. So think of it as like a workbench for doing that. And the idea is once you have it working, and this one doesn't work because of I pulled down that server last week, but it brings back a response. But here's what I want to show you so cool about this. Again, I could then get this information and go through and use Alpha to create like a curl command and all that stuff there. But one of the coolest features about Python or Postman is they have this cool feature. Once I get my API working correctly, you'll notice there's this little button called code. So I'm going to click on that. And then you'll see over here that I have a whole bunch of different ways to create the code. So it's writing sample code for me. Let's say I was using C. This is how I would do it as C. If I was using it in PHP, this is PHP code. But here, look at this one, Python request. Boom, there's the code right there. So now all I have to do is once I have it running here, I copy that. I go back into here and I go into my script right here, paste it, and I say return. There we go. I'm done. That's it. It's written all the code for me. So it's so cool because basically it's going to run this code right here. I imported the request library, runs this code based on the information I get back. I can just give it back to Alpha and off to the races they go from there. Or I can manipulate that here and then pass back what I wanted to Alpha, depending on what you want to do. It's up to you. But I thought one of the coolest things about the Python integration is that one of the challenging things, especially as you do more and more API work, is that I've got to call another API, I've got to provide it some data, get the data back, and I've got to format it correctly. It may say, this is a very simple example, like headers are really simple, payload is simple, but if it, some of these others get very complicated. So let me do another one here. I think, nope, not this one. Let's find another one here. Let's see. So let's look at the code here. You can see here's how the payload is formatted. Here's the headers and stuff like that. So it's a little more complicated there. But the neat thing is you don't have to sit down and spend all that time to kind of figure it out using curl or something like that. Once you got your API working in Postman, you literally click code, copy it, go into here, paste it, and now it runs and it works and it's good from there. So that's a simple example of how you can use Python integrated into your system to make your life a lot easier, because third-party systems have that ecosystem is so large on Python that there's a bunch of sample code out there. There's a bunch of tools like that will auto-generate code for you and just make your life much, much easier. So I wanted to illustrate that there. And one of the cool things about Alpha is that if I publish this to my server or to Alpha Cloud, Alpha takes care of making sure two things. One, all of the new files, the modules and Python stuff that's needed is up on my server. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I don't have to go to the server, install it or set it up, and it's all handled. In fact, I just did a project recently where I needed to use an API. This was last week, and I published it on an example on the cloud. And literally, I did everything locally, then published it on the cloud, and it just worked, which is how it should be. Shouldn't be surprised. But it handled all that information about Python, make sure the module's there, doing all the communication. And in fact, in that one, I used the request module because I was making a whole bunch of API calls to another system, passing data in, getting data back. And then, but I used Alpha to visualize that data in a UX. So I'm going to break at this point and open it up for questions. But again, check it out. Most important is do check out the request. There's a ton of samples and demos and stuff like that on the internet, but you may find if you're doing a lot of, excuse me, API work, this could significantly simplify your life. Plus, also, if you don't want to do the work yourself, you can hire a Python programmer who does this day in and day out. They can do all the work of getting this to work, and then basically you bring it back into Alpha to do whatever you want to do with it, either display it on the screen or make more modifications or do other calculations, etc. from there. So Python, really deep integration between Alpha and here, but let's go ahead and open it up and see if there's any questions for people. And
Sure. And if I could just add to the request module, the request module is really amazing. Actually, would you mind just doing a quick search? There's an official web page for requests.
oh yes, let me do that for you.
And it's, and I'm sure you've been there.
It's just, it really is nice. It makes life a lot easier, really. There.
Yeah. This one here. So it's funny. This website is devoted entirely to this one Python module, which is an open source module. And what does it say? Rated 46,000 times by people. I guess this thing is downloaded like, millions and millions of times.
Oh yeah, it's super hardcore. By the way, this looks a little confusing because they're doing a command line. These little 3 arrows, as if you're using the Python in command line, you're basically writing step after step. But
right, yeah,
yeah,
sort of like
you'll just have to
interactive window kind of is what you're looking at, which is a way of testing out this stuff. The other thing is to always pay attention to Python module numbers. Actually, Alpha's handling that for you, but I found that if you get a module that's if you've got 3.10 Python installed and you try installing the 3.9 module, you're going to get a conflict. And
yeah, you'll see up here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, pay attention to those. Those are
and 3.1 is like only a couple of months old.
It's brand new. Yeah,
I would definitely do 3.9 for anything, so.
Yeah.
But
yeah, let's see what else we've got for questions. It looks like some of them have been answered in the background, but actually, Sarah, can I bring you in? Because it looks like you've answered some of the questions. Are there any questions that
Thank you.
Answers with?
Are there questions that I would like to share the answers with? There is one, actually.
I know that was very awkwardly phrased. I appreciate it, but I think.
Well, I mean, I've been responding in the chat here, and I think I sent some pretty awkwardly phrased replies too. So.
All right, perfect. Well, then it'll all work together. Excellent.
It's something really important that people need to know and understand, and that is if you are doing stuff with a security framework, writing XBasic code, wanting to test logins, so on and so forth, you cannot do that in live preview or working preview. You can't test anything with the security framework in those interfaces. We can simulate the user's permissions as if they were logged in. So if you're setting up security group permissions on things and you just want to see is that control shown or hidden, you can do that in live and working preview. Because we ask, which group are you simulating? But the whole flow of logging in, getting the current user, so on and so forth, you can't test that. There's no session backing that to test that case. So what you have to use is live test, which you can find on the web projects control panel. And live test has several really cool features in it. First, you can test locally on the development server, which is included in the IDE. And it also has an option to enable the XBasic debugger. So you still have access to the XBasic debugger to test your scripts in that context. But the other thing you can do is you can live test up on Alpha Cloud, or if you're running the full IDE, you can live test on IIS or on the classic server. And that maybe that's a case where you're wanting to test something against data you have or something else that you've got published. That's an option for you as well. So if Dion, if you just move your mouse up next to the publish button, there's a live test right there, and just click that. Yeah. So this is live test. At the top, you see your 3 options, more than 3, but you have development server, you might have IIS, you have Alpha Cloud. So that's where you're testing. If you check the box for client-side debugging, that will give you access to the XBasic debugger. Note that you have to check that every single time you do this. We do not remember that setting for you. And then the third thing that you're going to need is you need to put the component or whatever it is that you're testing into an A5W page. If you don't have an A5W page, you can't run it. But once you've got that, you then have some options at the bottom, clear live test before publish. I'm always doing that because I'm testing different apps all the time. But I really strongly encourage people to try this out because this gives you the ability to test your app as a complete system. You're not just testing a component or some code in a script. You're testing the whole thing as a piece. It's very easy. It launches, it pulls it up. You don't have to mess with publishing locally anymore. You can just do this. And then with regards to Alpha Cloud, if people who have deployment limitations out there, if you're concerned about that, I believe we've made some changes to make sure that when that live test goes up, and it might be a next release, but it might be active now, it'll exist for 2 hours, and then we spin that down for you, so it's not counting against your usage or anything. So that's the whole 100,000 yards on that one.
Excellent. Thanks very
Awesome.
much.
Thank you. Great explanation.
So back over to a Python question, and these are difficult ones. All right. So can Alpha encrypt the Pi module on the server?
I don't know. That would have to be for the dev team.
Yeah.
I
And
see.
then
They
the
probably have
follow-up
data
was-
in that module they don't want anybody else to be able to see or so.
Yeah, I suppose like if you had hard-coded in an API key or something like that, that might make
Yeah.
sense.
I'll mention that, and actually that's a really good question and something I have to look into. Normally in the Python world, you'll have things like INI files and things like that where you store stuff. But the reality is what I've noticed in the Python world, they use what are called environment variables, which are set on the machine and only the person who's admin. So they're not actually in the text of any of your files. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you can set those kind of environments and reference them in Alpha Cloud. So you can use Alpha Cloud's environment variables. I have to double check that from there. But that said, there are ways you can kind of blend where what you can do, you can import, there's another built-in library called OS. And then what you can do is on your local machine, you could set those environment variables and read them in your script. So they're not actually in your script. And then wherever you deploy, on your server you're deploying this to, let's say it's your own server, you can log on to that server and put in those environment variables, sort of like publishing variables, but I'm not sure. I'd have to double check on Alpha Cloud. I believe you can set up environment variables and then your code can read it, but we'd have to double check on that. I haven't been able to explore that yet.
That would be great because it's a good practice not to include your API keys directly into
or your login or your database login
or any of
information.
those things, especially since you'll typically check them into GitHub and things like that where they'll live forever. So
yeah, and this is cool, by the way. If you can just use Alpha's connection string and stuff, so Alpha takes care of making sure all that's encrypted. Your Python scripts can kind of be dumb and just say, oh, I'm going to use Alpha to piggyback on them to actually talk to the database instead of trying to create your own separate database interface inside. You could do it in Python, but you're double, it's already there. So why not reuse Alpha? Simple.
And the next one, which is one I hadn't thought of, but at all, is can you use a script that's stored in a database or stored in an encrypted database field?
I think Python has the ability to kind of like XBasic has something called evaluate template, which runs whatever you give it as text and it's XBasic and it actually executes that. I'd have to double check, but I think Python has that kind of, because it's an interpreted language, meaning it's a scripting language, meaning it's not compiled. It runs on the fly. So I believe there are some techniques for doing that.
So
I have to double
you
check.
You pull the code that you wanted to run out of a field, perhaps, and put it into something like our like the function we have in XBasic to run it. So, gotcha.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to check on that, but that's a cool feature on that.
All right. Here's another question. So this is has to do with a list with an expanding detail view in the list.
Oh, okay.
Just wondering, is there a programmatic way to collapse a row once it's been expanded?
I believe so. So let's go into the UX here. Then we'll go to, I'm going to go here, JavaScript, and just look up. And remember, we have, where's this is where we would look up that. So let's see, we'll go up there. So remember, this is our, all the different built-in alpha functionality there. So it's expanding row. So, okay, that's an expanding menu. Row expand. Okay, this says list item footer. That's something. Okay, I think this is where if you have group breaks, but this is collapse or expand client-side group breaks, which is where you, in a list, you can kind of group things into chunks from that standpoint. But I don't think that's an expanding row capability.
Mhm.
Populate expanding menu control. That's menu. Those are all menu. Let's just try one other thing. So off the top of my head, I'm not sure if there's a built-in alpha or JavaScript command, but my guess is that is doable because they tend to expose all that capability. So list object. Oh, wait. That's list item footer. So that's, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Yeah, we'd have to look into that at this time. I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, just as a reminder, if you do have questions that we can't answer or we didn't get to today, you can always send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com.
Yes, indeed.
Let's see what else we've got.
Good question. Fancy.
I know. Very good question. Someone pointed out that they'd love to have as the in development environment like Notepad++, for example, instead of the XBasic editor. But that brings up another question. That's just a comment. But that brings up a question though, which is, how do you have your development environment set up? It looks like you're using Visual Studio to do your Python coding.
Yeah, because before I've been playing with Python, just learning it just for my own education,
Yeah.
and there was no integration. So I downloaded Visual Studio and just started using it because it's a really nice environment to run, edit scripts, run scripts, and do other things like that. They have a ton of like you can actually even debug in here stuff that I never touch. You'll see there's like a run. So what I can do is actually run these scripts outside of alpha, kind of check them out. Again, the problem with that is, again, you have to pass in this information. I don't know how you would do that outside of alpha at that time. The structure of that is sort of limited on that. But your other code, like your other stuff like this, you can run all this and test this and then just connect it into alpha at that time. But I like Visual Studio Code. The other one that's really is called JetBrains PyCharm. PyCharm. That's a very one, but that one's really heavy. I mean, it's a big system. It's like a super hardcore development environment for Python folks from there. But a lot of people just use Notepad or Notepad++ because
Python
go ahead.
comes with a development environment where it
that is true. Idle, I think it's called, or yeah. So tons of stuff out there. And the reality is often you're running these scripts in the command line. So it doesn't matter where you're editing them. You're just going to go to the command line and say, run this script here and go from there. So it's still okay. There's no real user interface on Python from the standpoint. It's more scripting oriented. But yeah, I think you can download, when you download Python, I think it enables idle. And there's like 2 or 3 other free ones that are available too. Thorn, stuff like that.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. Well, we are out of time. Dion and Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone here who attended, asked questions, and you can keep those questions coming to us at guides@alphasoftware.com. So we hope to see you at our next Wednesday webinar. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.